I welcome us all to this morning session of the EUEPiN workshop. And like we reiterated earlier on, the topic I'm facilitating this morning is evidence use and or evidence-informed decision-making initiatives. The foundation was laid, like I said earlier on, very well by Professor Neke yesterday. And what I'm doing now is to continue to lay on those foundations with some practicalities of what we can do. I'm also going to be sharing some of the experiences I've had and what I have done or currently doing, and essentially use that platform to encourage us on what we can do, and then we go into the breakout sessions. And so this is an outline of the sessions I have this morning. I will just do an overview, a one slide of what EIDM is. I will talk about these practical initiatives that we can develop for collaborations with policymakers and researchers. This was a key highlight of a lot of the pre-workshop feedback survey that we did. A lot of people were really interested in how do they build networks, how do they build collaborations with the policymakers. Policymakers also wanted to know how do they build collaborations with researchers. In fact, just before I shared this slide, one of the participants from the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech was just sharing that they have ongoing the review of the National Science, Technology and Innovation Policy. And they're very interested in having researchers on board, bringing to fore research evidence, mainstreaming that into the policy review that is ongoing. We would also talk about examples of EIDM initiatives. And these examples are basically called from some of the sessions that I have also undergone in terms of training with the African Institute of Development Policy, as well as the African Academy of Sciences and some other programs that I have had. One thing I just want to mention about these EIDM initiatives is that, as you would also notice with Professor Neke, he is a product of several years and sometimes even decades of training. In other words, when we want to implement or utilize EIDM or evidence, it's not something that we learn one time. We cannot, I'm sure we all appreciate that it's not possible for us to learn all the skills even within a degree program, because things are changing, things are evolving. But some basic skills that are required to initiate and start is what we are trying to do within this project and what we have been doing so far. You would also notice in Professor Neke's presentations that he started out small, and as he began to grow and learn from the initiatives he developed, he added more models to it. So the 9 models he shared, which are basically his own experiences, did not start out from the onset. They started out with an idea. He started out with a passion from someone. He kept reiterating somebody has to be crazy enough to start something. And I must tell you, in a way, that has been my experience, and I will share some of these in some of these examples that I will be talking about. In the 3rd or 4th session, I'm hoping that we will be able to develop our own EIDM initiatives. And we are going to be doing this by breaking out into the technical work groups for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the time that we have left. And then we will discuss within our work group some EIDM initiatives that we can actually come up with and do within that work groups. And of course, we can also think because the individual initiatives are some of the things that we are going to be considering in the EUEPiN secondment application that we're going to open immediately after this workshop. And I'll be talking about the secondments in the course of the project on Friday when we're rounding up. I'd like to just reiterate that the secondment is based on the model that Professor Neke shared, because he really mentored even the development of this project, and again from the experiences we have. The last thing I will share with us is looking ahead. I always talk about it in my presentations, which always goes back to why are you even here? Why are you doing research? What's the impact that you want to make or play for yourself as a policymaker at your institution or a researcher in your NGO, in your research institute, or at your university. And it ties for me with some of the current policy, global policy goals, original goals that we have. The Professor Neke has talked about the SDGs, so I'm not going to go back to that. But something that a lot of us are perhaps not so abreast with is the African Union Agenda 2063 goals. And Nigeria is a signatory to that document. And so we are actually bound to support the achievement of some of those goals. And these are mainstream in some of our policies that have been developed. It is the Africa we want. I'll talk about that towards the end. I'm starting with the overview of EIDM. And what we're saying with this, Professor Neke mentioned this yesterday, is that it's not opinion-based. We don't develop policy, or ideally, policy should not just be developed based on what the ruling political party feels or what some certain stakeholders alone feels. Ideally, policies should go through a rather rigorous process, but importantly, utilize high-quality research evidence. In my experience, and I'll share it with us, is that a lot of, even we researchers, as well as the policymakers, are not sure how to synthesize or summarize this research evidence, or even how to assess it, because some of the research evidence are not even accessible. If they are accessible, they are not utilizable, or in a form that the policymaker can utilize in either formulating or evaluating or reviewing or even implementing their policies. So ideally, this evidence should inform our policy formulation. It should go through the policy circle. We talked about this at the inception meeting. It's not just at the point of formulation or coming up with the policy that we consider research evidence. Research evidence should be considered and mainstream along the policy circle, all through from the agenda setting to the formulation, to the implementation, to the monitoring and evaluation or appraisal, and going back to the review. For instance, the current STI review. Now, in terms of practical applications about how can we develop collaboration, like I said, I want to share from my experiences, and it's good to contextualize things like we talked about yesterday. So we understand what is possible within our context in Nigeria, within our context as our institutions, and considering the variety and peculiarities of our organizations. I work currently at the University of Lagos, though I also belong to other societies, and I also consult with some government agencies. And so my experiences are shared from these capacities that I have developed over the years. But I also came from industry. I had a bit of industry experience in the oil and gas sector. And so all of this shaped my experiences about how collaborations can be developed practically and how we can use that for we researchers to conduct demand-driven research that will impact society, because that is at the end of the day what both we researchers and policymakers want to achieve in the long run. We want our policies to impact society. We want our research to impact society. We want it to drive sustainability. We want it to solve problems. First thing I mentioned here, I said incorporating policymakers and industry interactions in academic programs. Like I said, this is similar to some of the things Professor Neke shared yesterday. At the moment at the University of Lagos, I'm part of the coordinators and teachers in the master's program for the environmental toxicology and pollution management. And over the past 4 years that I've joined the team in teaching that course, we have consistently on an annual basis included or incorporated policymakers and industry leaders in part of the delivery of one of the courses in this program. We teach a course called Environmental Regulations and Standards. And thankfully, some of our facilitators or some of the industry partners or policymakers that we have invited to facilitate some sessions are here. Mr. Lasisi is here with us. Usually he comes representing the Lagos State Ministry of Environment to give us the policy angles and the current initiatives that are ongoing with respect to environmental regulations and standards in Lagos State. I must say that our students usually cut across from even people working in industry and people working in government. And all the time, apart from the academic ones, the ones we teach, a lot of the time they look forward to these particular sessions with the policymakers and industry experts. Why? Because these people are coming with practical field and usually years of experience in applying the skills that they are developing in the program. That is not to say that we academics who are teaching it don't have practical knowledge, but a lot of the time it is field consultancies that we do, and then the research that we do. But from the policy making angle, they really appreciate current things, because a lot of them come into the program and they're like, well, I want to get this degree so that I can find myself in certain organization, but I don't know how to work my way. I don't even know how this degree can be relevant to what's happening at that organization. I don't even know where I can come in. In terms of even designing projects, I'm not even sure what to do, because I'm not sure what are the current realities, what are the current issues that I want to solve. These policymakers bring it on board. We also have the Federal Ministry of Environment. From the Lagos Zonal Office, we always have someone who comes representing the Federal Controller, who also delivers the federal government's perspectives on environmental regulations and standards. In the last 2 years, we've had an industry expert also coming from Shell. A lot of the time, he flies in from Port Harcourt. And all these people, I must say, they come to do these usually 2-hour sessions that we plan pro bono. And that's one thing that Professor Neke underscored yesterday. We researchers and policymakers must always think, when we are undertaking or considering collaborations, we should not stand from the standpoint of what monetary gain can I get. I started out this passion, not that I don't need money, but I was really interested in making an impact. And so when I began to network and meet with these persons, I never knew anyone there. How did I know or meet people at Lagos State Ministry of Environment? We usually take, again, part of our postgraduate program, we take students for public review of environmental impact assessment reports. So we inform the ministry, we say we'd like our students to come as participants, because these are usually public panels that is open to the public or to the stakeholders in that community. And so, again, like Professor Neke mentioned, I always go there, but I always go with my call card. And I always ensure I introduce myself to the key people on the board, both the people from the ministry and then the people who are the consultants. It is in one of those interactions, or several of those, taking students out and also attending those panels, that I met the Federal Controller, then Mrs. Agbenla. And then I also usually meet Mr. Lasisi, because as he introduces himself, he works in the Environmental Impact Assessment Department. And that's how we began to discuss, how can you come? This is very, very good for our students. Our students actually get practical knowledge and actually see the application of what they're doing. And it makes them, very much interested in course, even helps them to channel their focus strongly in the program, not just looking at the academics and how to pass an exam. And so this is how this collaboration started. It started with inviting them to participate as facilitators or teachers in one of our courses. And there was no criteria. They didn't have to have a PhD. To the best of my knowledge, none of them have a PhD at the moment. But of course, we ensured that the people who were coming were people who had spent a lot of years of experience at these institutions and who can bring on board those years of experience to pass on this knowledge. The same thing with industry, because at the end of the day, we find out that these experiences that they share help to shape thinking, but also help to shape designs of projects that we conduct for our students. And you won't believe it, beyond the students, we even have faculty members who join those sessions, because the sessions are not only beneficial to them, they even benefit faculty members, even up to professors, our HOD. Every year we have it. These are some of the things that we can consider. I'm talking to the researchers now and people working in universities and policy making and research institutions. For those of us who are not in university, but you're in research institutions, you have people who come in on secondments. You have training or seminar sessions. For instance, at NEOMA, I think Dr. Jerome mentioned that. At NIMASA, at FIRO, I know you have sessions like that. You can look at, and that's why we immediately mapped policymakers and researchers into groups. We can begin collaborations from something like this. Invite them. I'm not saying if it's possible for you to provide some monetary benefits, or if there's a training budget, you can give some stipends, at least to support the transport of these people, fine. But please, let's begin to consider an initiative like this, and that's how we build collaboration. Another thing is involving policymakers in research design. Again, I want to share a bit from my own experience. Professor Neke shared from his own. One thing I took away, like I said, he mentored me, first from a distance, because I never met him until about 4 months when we were curating experts and facilitators for this workshop. I only looked at his papers and read his papers and said, great, somebody is doing this in Nigeria, but in the health sector, I want to champion this in the environment sector. I'm sure for some of us who have probably checked, there is hardly, if anything about utilizing evidence or any initiative on evidence-informed decision-making in the environment, not just in Nigeria, but even in Africa. And that's why this is an African, a regional project. The only place I saw that they have a center for environmental evidence is in South Africa, and I'm sure a lot of us will agree with me why that is so. So we want to champion this, and that's why this started. But we want this to be focused on the environment. So one of the things he told me, he said, you know what, when I'm designing projects for my students, I'm not looking around, and he mentioned it yesterday. I send my postgraduate students to the ministries. Go and find out what's the problem they want to solve there. What are their issues there? And then they come back, design projects around this, and they implement the project. He mentioned another thing yesterday which I've picked, and I'm going to apply it. He said a lot of the time in Nigerian context, the students fund their own postgraduate programs. In order to help save costs, students can join, and that's where the collaboration with policymakers comes in. For instance, we have some ongoing projects that we have developed. Last year, I got a small seed fund to undertake a science advice for policy fellowship at the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech. Even getting that placement at the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, you won't believe it, was a product of collaboration. How? I just mentioned it to Mr. Lasisi at the Lagos State Ministry of Environment. There's this opportunity I have. I need to undertake it at the policy-making institution, and I need to undertake it in a place where they have active policy formulations going on. And he mentioned to me, you won't believe it, I myself was not even sure that I knew about the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech before. He just mentioned that institute to me, and then I think he gave me a contact. I began doing research, and that's how it is. I have never given Mr. Lasisi any money before. But the kind of collaboration that we have had, and both current and in the past, is not something money can buy. That is what informal relationships can have and can build. So we involve them in our research design. Of course, somebody who is that beneficial, somebody who knows his beings. We began to involve them in our project designs when we get international grants and we are developing proposals with international partners. When people come to me and say, we need policymakers, we don't know who to talk to, I said, I know who to talk to. And it's just to put a call through to them and explain what this project is. The truth is that we need the policymakers as much as the policymakers need us. For some of us who have, I'm talking to researchers now, who have applied for international grants in recent times, you will realize that a lot of the time for your grant to fly, you must include a policymaker as part of your stakeholders in your research design and in the dissemination and implementation of your projects. Most of the time, if that's not included, if you are not getting grants, that might be it. And so you need to begin to consider it. One of the questions somebody asked yesterday was that, but I don't know which policy institution or even which policies my research fits into. That's where we need to do research. And that's why we need to develop this kind of collaboration. Because even if there is some policy that is not relevant at one of the institutions, those policy-making institutions know each other and they can always refer us. Just like I mentioned the case with Lagos State Ministry of the Environment, Mr. Lasisi. At the moment, that fellowship was not something that I could undertake there, but he was able to refer me because they work hand in hand. It's the same thing with researchers. We all work hand in hand. If a policymaker, I noticed Mr. Lasisi was engaging with Dr. Lujimi, I think on the first day of the workshop, and say, we're doing something on radiation. I need a link with a researcher in the UK. This is what collaboration can do. Because we researchers, of course, have links with, we are co-researchers, both outside and within. We can always link up to policymakers to the best or most relevant researcher and vice versa. That way collaboration is going on. One thing that I noticed with we, not just researchers, what he said, I think it's a Nigerian thing. We always want to hold things to ourselves. I just want to keep it to myself. I don't want to share it. If I share it, I will not get the maximum. You alone cannot eat it all. That is the truth. You alone cannot do the research. Research now is even so collaborative. One person cannot complete it. One institution even cannot complete it. That's why collaboration is very key across board. And not just for policymakers, but even with industry. And that's why we have NGOs there, even with civil society. So some of these projects I have mentioned here, like the one on the Sustainability Science Dialogue, it was a concept that was being brewed at the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, then with Dr. Ekweozo. And, you know, I just happened on that concept, and then I took it forward based on my experience with, you know, running environmental society programs and initiatives like this, and we developed a concept note from it. And to the best of my knowledge, if not for COVID, we would have had the first Sustainability Science Dialogue this year. This is what can be achieved when we have policymakers integrating researchers in their design, project designs, and researchers integrating policymakers in their research design. When I got to Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, I'm actually one of those who felt before my advent for that fellowship that civil servants or those who work in this ministry just go there, sit down, watch movie from morning till night, and don't do anything. And that's why nothing is working. I was sincerely one of those who had that thought, who had that perspective. But when I went, so when I was even going to the FMST, first of all, the director had challenged me about the lot of projects that he wanted me to do. But I was like, okay, let's even see. Is it these people that, but when I got there, ladies and gentlemen, these people work. And that's why, you know, Professor Oneke talked about stakeholders in the policy making process, though usually we can't get to the elected or those in the presidential, but the civil servants, those who are technocrats, those who are career policy makers, they work. And the truth is that they are the ones who actually do the policy formulation. I was there, I saw it face to face, and I'm talking to researchers now because the policy makers know what they do. I was there, I saw it. They are the ones who do it, they are the ones who have to think, they are the ones who have to get, they are the ones who need to provide this information. And so I collated a list, a robust list of policies that were available and policies that they had ongoing and those that they had even in review. And if some of us have looked at that document of technical working groups, you will see that the partner institutions listed quite a number. And I can assure you what they have listed is not exhaustive. So there is a lot of work to do. That's what I'm trying to underscore here. And no one can do it alone. The policymakers cannot do it alone. But the truth is, a lot of the time, they don't know how to operate with researchers. Because sometimes too, they feel that, you know, we feel like we are over there, we are unreachable. And of course, some other barriers that we will not mention here. But this forum now is serving as a base for that interaction to start. With the Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, we have a plastics project proposal that we submitted. One was declined, we have one ongoing, and we're expecting a feedback. We are working on that project both with Lagos State, but also with the Federal Ministry of Environment and some NGOs as well. These are projects that we developed, we designed together, we start together, both with the researchers and the policymakers as well. In fact, I think in the second plastic proposal, it was the Lagos State Ministry of Environment who approached me. And this is what I'm saying in policymakers involving them in research design. Apparently, they were approached by a UK institution to identify researchers that they can collaborate with on this project, and then they approached me. So you can see that if I did not have a relationship with them, they probably will be they will not be sure who to approach. Not just relationship, but a active, sustained relationship is what brought about such a recommendation or even thought to approach me about this. And I, of course, in tandem approach other people because, like I said, one person cannot do everything. So we need to know each other. Another one we have ongoing again with Lagos State is a wastewater project that is already approved. We are working with them under the Global Grand Challenges Research Fund with the EUEPiN, and they're working with us on that. We're working with some of the EMDAs under the Lagos State Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. Again, this is a product of involving policymakers in research, and then also knowing what their needs are in terms of what are the challenges. COVID cuts across everyone, I'm sure you know it now, and even in environment. But one of the areas where a lot of focus has not been on COVID is in the area of environment, and we have developed another proposal again with our PI in the UK, and we're involving the Lagos State Wastewater Management Office. Again, this is what it means that at the point of even designing the research, the policymakers are involved because they are the ones who provide the demand. What are the problems? What do we need to do? Where are the sources? Where do we need to get information? And then this will now snowball as we design the research and implement the research. And even in the outcomes, they are involved. They should be involved in all the process up to dissemination. It's at the point of dissemination, again, that we researchers also need to develop skills. Because a lot of the times, the research, the dissemination that we usually do, which is academic publication, is not utilizable in that form by the policymakers. So we need to take our dissemination skills a step further by learning how to produce policy briefs, and we're going to get the training on that tomorrow by Dr. Rose Oronje. By learning also how to produce even something as simple as, well, it's not so simple if you don't have the graphic skills, infographics and graphical abstracts. Those of us who are researchers know that if you want to publish now in high quality journals or publishers like Elsevier, you have to include a graphical abstract as part of your manuscripts. What's a graphical abstract? It's just a synopsis in pictures, usually, with usually very little text about what this project is, or what this manuscript is, or what this publication is. From what was the objective, how did you do it, that's what the graphical abstract is. The infographic is also like that. You are communicating that technical information, that technical document that you have done. You are communicating in it in a way that non-technical audiences like policymakers can understand and usually utilize it. Another thing now that we are beginning to contextualize, particularly within COVID, because I'm working with some of our advisors and some high-profile people who are part of task forces at state levels or federal levels in COVID response. And one of the key things that we are mentioning to them is we need to contextualize in terms of including language in our translation documents. I'm part of the ethics committee at the Nigerian Young Academy. And one of the things that we did recently is that we worked on sex for grades issue in Nigerian universities. And one of our mandates was that it's not just that we should synthesize evidence and collate responses. Like Professor Oneke mentioned to us, when we are synthesizing evidence, we're not just looking at evidence from research or experimental. We also needed to consider experiential evidence and evidence from people in the community themselves. Evidence also from the culture and the peculiarities of the society, and merge all of this in order to be able to come up with policy recommendations and things that can utilize. But what we said was that when we have collated these evidences, publishing it just as a manuscript is not going to get to the people who need to use it. It will not achieve the aim of that paper. We therefore had to produce a policy brief, even though the policy brief, as far as I'm concerned, was not, it didn't have a lot of pictures or graphics like we wanted to. But it was a first step, because what we did was that we distilled information of several places into just 2 pages. It's easier for us to pass that on to a vice chancellor or to pass that on to the NUC or the stakeholders to just read what is the issue, what are your key messages, what are the policy recommendations. I learned that again from my experience at the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech. After I completed my fellowship, I was required to submit a report. And like a researcher like myself, I delivered a report of several pages, almost over 10 pages, because I had a lot. I delivered about 7 seminars, I had focus group discussions, we had surveys. So I delivered all of those, and it was reading like a manuscript. And I was so happy, you know, thinking, and the man, and then one of the people who was assigned to me, they said, this is not utilizable. We can't take this to the permanent secretary of the minister. We just need what are the key points, what are the recommendations, what are the action points. Professor Neke mentioned that yesterday. You don't just give generic recommendations. What are the people? Action it. What do you want them to do as a result of this evidence that you have gathered in this current work? Who are the people that should do it? Make it actionable. At the end of the day, that several pages, over 10 pages document came to about 1 or 2. That's what we're talking about. How do you synthesize? How do you summarize the research evidence? The evidence is there, but you have summarized it and you have made it actionable. We all need it, both the researchers and policy, particularly researchers, because we are the evidence producers. And usually our mode of dissemination is usually in publications. Even at conferences, our mode of dissemination also needs to change in a way. We want to ensure we emphasize, what do you want people to take away from this? What do you want people to do with this thing that you have disseminated? We must begin to learn the skills, and we are going to learn more of this from the other presentations by the other facilitators. I've exactly gone into the other thing I wanted to say: policy brief, evidence synthesis on relevant and current policy or program areas. There is a current policy that the Lagos State is working on, and that I've been invited to contribute in. It's on the plastic policy. In December, I think last year, I was invited to deliver a talk at the Lagos State waterfront cleanup. And one of the things I mentioned about contributions to pollution, particularly in the Lagos Lagoon, which is the biggest water that bounds us anyway, is the issue of solid waste disposal on the waters. And then I mentioned that we have some research ongoing and all of that. And that's why the PAM said, oh, please, we need to, since you are doing research in this area, we need to gather evidence so that with the policy we're developing, we can mainstream this, and we can also consider stakeholders analysis and all of that. How can we involve ourselves in this kind of situations, or in this kind of discussions, and in this kind of projects that are ongoing? Like I said, let's not come from the point of view of how much am I going to be offered. After all, there's money attached to it. If you're offered money, fantastic. If you're not, one way or the other, it will be in your CV that you contributed to it. Please, let's consider these things. We have another project that I'm doing in collaboration with one of our advisors, the DVC of University of Ibadan, Professor Adeyemo, in concert with the National Academy of Science. And what we're doing is that we are coming up with a thematic focus, looking at what is the status of implementation of the SDG. I put 4 here, I'm sorry, is on the SDG 6, clean water and sanitation in Nigeria, and life below water. We're looking at that and see what are the future directions in Nigeria. We were not commissioned to do this. It was just something that we came up with. Again, we were challenged too. I think we went for a NAS conference, and issues about SDGs. People from the SDG office came and they were talking to us about SDGs. And a lot of us were concerned that we could not find very clear indicators of the achievement of SDGs. Of course, in order to be able to get indicators, we need evidence for this. And we researchers needed to contribute. So we just said, okay, in our own way, this is how we can contribute. Let's synthesize, let's collate, let's invite people, researchers, to contribute areas of research that they have done towards this particular SDG. And that's what we have ongoing at the moment. We didn't receive so many good applications, but it's a step in the right direction that a lot of us can also consider doing this. Like I said, we were not commissioned to do it, we're not receiving money, it's a lot of work, but this is one way that we're hoping to correct them, to contribute to the discussions along this line. So, examples of EIDM interventions that I want to talk about today is that we have sustained interactions between policymakers and researchers. And examples of how we can have this in this broad focus is, can we have an introduction of a budget line for regular evidence and policy forums like this? We are not coming, it's not a society meeting, we are not coming to just come and deliver papers. We are only interested in evidence and policy. That's all we want to talk about in such a forum. Quarterly might be too often, we can start with biannual, even if it's annual, where we come and we discuss what are the current policy issues, what are the current evidences, how have they been mainstreamed, what are the next steps to take. Have discussions around this. Another thing is, can we have dedicated researchers dedicated in our department who are interested in participating actively in technical working groups? And that's why we formed TWGs in this particular, for this particular workshop, but also for the other activities that we'll be doing in this project. Of course, we cannot force our partner institutions to incorporate these technical working groups. They might have the idea about how to include people. But what we are saying is we want these technical working groups to act like a forum, not just for collaboration, but for us to contribute to policies utilizing evidence. That thing I want to mention in utilizing evidence is that, again, a lot of we researchers always find ways of just putting all our research in a particular area and say, yes, this is the evidence, and let them just be saying my name. I've made that mistake too. When we are going to talk about synthesizing research evidence by Dr. Danso Appiah on Thursday, you will see that there are actually criteria. And sometimes some of those criteria might not capture your research if you did not, meet the selection criteria. What we want to build is synthesizing and utilizing high quality evidence. And of course, in doing that, some of you also realize or gain skills on how we can better our own research designs to ensure that the research that we are producing is not the type of salami publication that we need just for promotion, but the ones that are high quality and utilizable and really contribute and can be utilized and mainstreamed into policy documents. The second thing is institutionalize evidence synthesis mechanisms. And examples under this, we can have establishment of an evidence synthesis center. It's a high goal, but it's something that we are hoping that we might be able to start, even if we cannot completely have it set up and within this project life cycle at the moment, except we get additional funds. We want to do this at the university and in collaboration with the ministry. A lot of the times, the centers, the research centers that we have in our universities are just made up of we researchers alone. But if we truly want our research to impact society, we must find a way of incorporating relevant industry partners and policymakers in some of these our centers. That way, we don't need to really, think very widely about what is the next research to do, which will, of course, next research to do, what's the next research proposal to write to assess the fund. The research to do will be provided for us by the policy-making institution so that that research will now be demand-driven. It will be driven by the demands from the policy-making institutions. And of course, vice versa, when the research has been completed and you have outcomes, it will immediately be uptake by the research and by the policy-making institutions because they were involved in the design of the research. They were incorporated in the design of the research. They are part of the center. They are part of the running of that program or that group that we are doing. They can even provide, like I mentioned to you, I didn't meet the researcher at the UK who was approached. They approached the Ministry of Environment, and the Ministry of Environment in turn approached me as the researcher, because they cannot deliver what the UK PI wants, but they have people that they are collaborating with who can deliver it. It's the same way. When we're doing, particularly for centers where we need to incorporate very big grants like millions of dollars or so, we need a lot of time, and I'm talking from experiences. I've also reviewed international applications like Newton and all that. It's a selection criteria. They want to see glaringly, not just that you mention the policy makers that you're partnering with, but they want to see evidence of collaboration even before now with those partner institutions. It is important, and I've noticed from experience again that a lot of time when you're able to provide that and they support you with a letter, a lot of the time it flies, because it shows that the research that they are providing money for this project, they can be sure that at the end of this research, it will be immediately incorporated into policy and mandates of that partner institution. And of course, when it's incorporated, it's going to benefit the society, because that's the mandate, that is the essence of the setup of those partner institutions. For instance, let me take, for example, the Federal Ministry of Environment. The mandate of the Federal Ministry of Environment is that they want to ensure the sustainability of the environment ecosystems in Nigeria: air, water, soil, and of course humans, but mostly the environment. You are doing work in the environment because we are all environmental researchers. Then they have different policies going on. They have a climate change policy. They have things going on air quality. They have things going on waste management and solid waste. You are working in one or two of these areas. You want to find out what are the current policy initiatives or projects they have ongoing around the thematic area you want to write on. And then you want to see what are the gaps that they need to fill, which you can now fill as a researcher in form of developing that proposal. You tell them about it. What are the gaps? You have gotten information, you have included them in your design. And then of course, they will even be willing to help you. Why? Because you are also helping them to fulfill their mandates. That's why I said this partnership is give and take. As we researchers are getting ideas in terms of what we can come up with based on our expertise, but that can solve some immediate and relevant current problems by this partner or policy-making institution, we are also in turn helping them to achieve their mandates, because their mandate is to solve those problems, but they need to solve it through some people and through some mechanisms. And a lot of the time, these mechanisms that involve research are not their own area of expertise. That's why they need us. That's why they need the civil society organizations. Like we have Rainforest Limited here, we have SegDev here, we have NES. That's why they need the professional societies, these people who are doing research. We also have research departments, in some ministries. This is what they do so that it can support the implementation of their mandate. And a lot of the time when they are able to provide evidence of implementing their mandate, they are also able to attract funds, which they can even sometimes, most times rather, give to researchers to commission some research. Because you're helping me to solve a problem, I'll be motivated, I'll be incentivized to commission you to solve additional problem for us. You are making life easy for me, I make life easy for you. Your problem will no longer be you don't have funding. Your problem will be how to do the research, because you now have a lot of research in your hands. This is what we have. This is what we want to achieve. Provide technical assistance to ministries of environment or government departments interested in establishing evidence synthesis units, so that it is not only one time when they just invite you as part of the technical group. We want to also have a unit. It might not start up with an office, it might just start up with some group. At the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, they had a climate change group committee. I've forgotten how they call it now, but climate change that they had set up. And part of the things that we achieved while I was there is that I set up a WhatsApp group for those people in that climate change. Now, the people in that climate change committee they represent scientific officers from a lot of the MDAs within the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, and there are 17 MDAs in the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech. In that climate change group, a lot of the time I send funding information. Some of this funding information can only be accessed by policymakers. It is only meant for government agencies. Some of these policy information, funding information are only meant for researchers, but they must have partnership with policymakers who are working relevant to that policy. Like for instance, the IPCC, you want to get a fund in the area of maybe climate change intervention or something. Usually they will send you to the coordinating center or the coordinating unit for climate change or IPCC in your country. I've had applications like that. That's when I even began to, that's when I even know that we have such. And then I will now write letters and all of that. We can start that now if you know that's your research area. Who are the people in this area and how can we work together? Another thing is capacity building, and this is what we're doing within this project, because this project is really about capacity building. And like I mentioned, capacity building is something that is ongoing. It's not something that can be completed within 1 year. But the point is, we're building on foundation and we're going like that. What we have, the skills that we have developed, we apply it and then we're building upon that. So we can introduce training programs on EIDM, on evidence synthesis at our university. Professor Dr. Lujimi mentioned something like this. He said he's working with Dr. Bada. He mentioned it yesterday, and that, you know, when they were trying to come up, develop it, they were not sure how to start or so. I'm not sure if they've gotten it running, but he had mentioned that a lot of the information he had now received, particularly from Professor Neked's lecture yesterday, will motivate them, you know, to start off this thing. This is the kind of thing that we want. That you can start up as a group and develop, and we can work hand in hand together. Like how I, you know, found out about Professor Neked. I don't work in health policy research, but through his publications, through also information from my own network within the African Academy of Sciences and other academies, I got to know about him. I got to know about him outside Nigeria, not even within Nigeria. And then I began to find how to network with him. We don't always have to be the ones to facilitate the training, even if you start something. We initiate the project, and then we facilitate, we get people who are, you know, who are experts in that area, who can deliver on it. And that way we are being built, we are also building others, and we are seeing champions across the country. It's very important at every point that we involve both policymakers and researchers, and also people in industries and media. It's very important. Provide technical assistance to training institutions who want to introduce these courses or programs. Conduct regular EIDM and synthesis training workshops. One of the things that I realized when I got to the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, that they actually have training schedules as part of their annual programs. And it was within one of those training schedules that I was kind of put in. Like I said, I deliver about 7 capacity building seminars, 2 per week while I was there. So if you, as a researcher, is proposing to undertake a secondment or a sabbatical at a policy-making institution, except maybe you don't find someone like Dr. Ekweozo, okay? Please be prepared that you are going there for work. He's not going there to sit down and just look for opportunity to stay at home. Let's go there and build it. And what I've learned, and what I learned is that after I spent 6 weeks. After that 6 weeks, the people I met, I could never have met them in my life, even as a professor. I met people at TED Funds. I think the permanent secretary of TED Fund or the head was there, people from different agencies at the dissemination workshop. Through these training programs that we did, and they all contributed to the outcomes that they want to have achieved, and they were going to integrate it in their programs. Very, very important. Please, when we are undertaking this kind of secondment and sabbatical, because what we are proposing is that we want this to begin to be part of ministry's programs or ministry schedule to allow for or integrate a budget for researchers from university and research institutions to undertake sabbaticals at policymaking institutions, but vice versa as well. That universities also provide a forum or a platform for policymakers to come for sabbaticals. And in that capacity, they are not coming to take over your lectures because they don't have the qualification to say, okay, handle all of this program. But one of the things that we want to have for the policymakers comment is that we want them to interact actively with the researchers, and particularly the postgraduate students, because from the postgraduate level, you are beginning to drive your research agenda. You are beginning to design what do you want to do. in the area of research. How do you want your research to impact society? Because that's what the research and institutions and universities are mandated for. So when the policymaker comes and they are coming with their policy perspective, it helps to shape researchers, particularly from early careers, even up to professors. And we see that that contribution is something that money cannot buy. Another thing that we want to talk about is on guidelines and tools. And I'm running a bit out of time. I'll try to run through it because I want us to have the breakout sessions. Another intervention that we can have with government agencies, we can develop tools or guidelines for EIDM. EIDM is not just something that we just talk about and then we just start it. We can come up with a guideline and a contextualized guideline. There are guidelines that are available already. For instance, AFIDEP have guidelines that they have used with ministries in Nairobi, Kenya. But these guidelines might not be contextualized to our own peculiarities here in Nigeria. We can come up with an initiative to develop a guideline stepwise about how we can institutionalize or incorporate or mainstream EIDM into the activities of government agencies and even the activities of universities. An example is what Dr. Akindele and Professor Oneke were mentioning yesterday. Is it possible for the Research Ethics Committee of universities to ensure that, working with policy, current policy initiatives is mainstreamed into research ethics approval applications? What policy is your research feeding into? Can this be uptake into this particular government policy at the moment? It is also an EIDM initiative that we can think about. And I believe strongly that it's something that University of Lagos will take, but I'm encouraging other institutions to also consider this. Guidelines for knowledge translation. Knowledge translation is important. After we have synthesized the evidence, we want to make it available. The policymakers, the parliamentarians are not going to read several pages document. But when it is in pictorial form and it's summarizing the evidence that we have, they will pay attention to it at least. Because anybody would pay attention to something that is visual first before something that is textual.
Okay, you can hear your name, Abby.
Another thing, and I have just one more to go, is institutionalize EIDM funding of budgets. I mentioned budget earlier. Budget lines for knowledge translation and EIDM initiatives. How do we disseminate the policy initiatives that we have or the research that we have? We can drive or feed into a particular policy. We as researchers, are we only disseminating it through publications? We as policymakers, the policies that we have ongoing, like for instance, the SCI review that is going on, how are we translating in our M&E, the appraisals that we have done, how are we communicating it to the stakeholders for them to see if we have achieved anything at all or not? Is it only in terms of reports? Who are we disseminating to? What media are we partnering with? In what form are we disseminating this evidence? We need to consider this. Engage high-level government officials to advocate for introduction of budget lines for EIDM structure or platforms or services. An example Professor Oneke showed us yesterday is a policy information platform that is set up at their center at the Ebonyi State University. Because why? And he said that was born out of a demand. What was the demand? He realized that a lot of people were not aware of the policies that were available, particularly researchers. It will amaze you, even while I was at Federal Ministry of Science and Tech, that even officers within the ministry were not aware of some of the policies that were within that ministry, and they worked there. This is the truth. So it means that those policies are somewhere hidden where people cannot access it, and so they cannot know how to contribute or how to deliver on it. Like he mentioned, we have so many policies. This is something that we can think about. All the policies, for instance, that we have in Lagos State Ministry of Environment that has to do with or has bearing on environment. Is it possible for us to have it publicized on the website of the Lagos State Ministry of Environment, so that anyone who wants to access some information, either we provide a link or a contact person who can be contacted if you want to discuss or you want to get some, apply for some fundings to support the achievement of that policy mandate. Can we make it public? we were able to do this at the Federal Ministry of Science. If you go to the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech website now, they have those policies listed there. If you go to each of these ministries, these are some of the things we encourage. On social media, they advocate their activities and they show it. These are some of the skills that I trained them on the scientific officers in which they are doing and implementing. Very proud of them. Research department, research repository for environmental research, evidence synthesis mechanism, introduce knowledge translation and communication department. At the University of Lagos, and I'm not trying to be biased, we have a communication department. But that communication department, either we set up a subunit, will not be alone for communicating activities and academic programs. Let it also communicate research findings of the university, relevant to relevant government agencies or government projects. So that because one of the problems that as barriers that policymakers have is that we are saying we are claiming we have the evidence, but they cannot access it, they cannot find it. Are we going to come to your university library to pick up your research evidence? If they go online to access these papers, they have to pay. So how are they going to access it? But if this is communicated from universities and research institutions, even if it's the abstract and then we put the information or someone to contact, if somebody needs more knowledge, that is something we're already making that information available, that information utilizable in a way. This is something that we can think about and we can consider in terms of communication use at our university. The last thing, and those ones I put in red, are some of the things that we're achieving within this project. It's the building of a community of practice. It's the third objective of this project. That we want people, this is the first course, who throughout this year have built skills in the area of EIDM and who are going forward to start their own initiatives or to collaborate and come up with initiatives to expand and develop more champions. We started this at the University of Lagos, I as the project lead, but if we want to say we want to cut this across Nigeria, it will take years. But if we have 50 people who have developed capacity in this, across, for instance, research institutions in Southwestern, cohorts at each of the research institutions start an initiative, and they expand it to other universities in their region, and also policymakers within their region, because, for instance, now, apart from the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech in Abuja, it's only those environmental policymaking institutions in Lagos that we are collaborating with in this project. You can also do that with your states. And if you say, but I don't know who to talk to, that's what I'm also saying about collaboration. The truth is that the people in Lagos State Ministry of Environment will know people in the other State Ministry of Environment, they can connect you. The people at the Federal Ministry of Environment Lagos Zonal Office can connect you with the other zonal offices. The people at the Federal Ministry of Science and Tech can connect us with the MDAs across the states. That way, we are supporting expansion of capacity all through across Nigeria. In one clear slide, because we have 50 people, and we also have mentors who are willing to support us. Professor Oneke has said, if you want to spearhead something or champion something, particularly in the area of environment, because he has built capacity in the area of health, he'll know. But he's also interested because, like he said, in the area of environment, there is hardly any EIDM initiative. And he's willing to support such initiatives because he has built expertise and he's willing to mainstream it. He's ready to help us. So can we come up with something that we can do? And if you're talking about funding, I know at some point you will require funding. Start off with something. We are also working on getting additional funding from both the current funders or additional funders. And we are considering people who have laudable initiatives to expand in their own region. We can also fund it. That way, we are expanding and championing. AFIDEP also got this funding from an international funder. And their mandate was to expand expertise for EIDM across East and West Africa. So they collated fellows and affiliates from the African Academy of Sciences that they trained. We have been receiving training over the period of 2 years. Of course, it's competitively applied for because we cannot all be trained. And so over the period of 2 years, we have gotten training in evidence-informed policymaking, research translation, and knowledge translation. And through that, their aim is they are building champions across these countries who are also expected to build champions. And that way, we're expanding the knowledge base and skills and capacity for EIDM across Africa. And I will come to why we need that when I'm talking about the Africa we want. But now I want us to go into the technical work group sessions. I've said a lot, but I'm hoping that a lot of the things that I've said would actually ignite some passion in us, both as individuals, but as well as groups, to begin to look at what initiatives can we think about. And really, I want us to think about not initiatives that we need some big money to start. A lot of the initiatives, like this initiative that we have ongoing, did not start with any money. It just started with an idea. It started with a passion. It started with an interest. And then we began to look at who can work with us on this before potentials for getting some funding started to come. I will now, we'll now group participants into the breakout rooms. Now,